to the next in the series of aged care webinars brought to you by Protecht and Law Compliance. And given that we've all had about 30 plus days of our feet under the table from this act, or the new Aged Care Act, coming into force, we're going to take a look at a more practical approach to implementing the requirements of the Act. And our focus today for the webinar is turning compliance into everyday action. And I guess the messaging, which we'll cover a little bit more later, is sure, we've got an Act to comply with, and we can take the very short focused view of let's just comply, or we can look at the bigger picture where the value is really going to come from, which is to turn the requirements of the Act into everyday action to make a difference to our operating model, and obviously fundamentally to the better outcomes for our older people in our industry. Now, as part of this, we could do a webinar that goes for about 6 hours to cover turning the Act into everyday action. Obviously, we don't want to take up that amount of your time, so we're going to do a more deep dive focus to show examples of bringing this to life, and that is going to be a focus on whistleblowing and incident management, but the approach can be used for all other elements of the Act. So by way of introduction, my name is David Tattam. I'm the Chief Research and Content Officer at Protecht, and I'm also joined by Chris. Before I pass over to Chris for an introduction, briefly mention who we are as a firm. So Protecht, the name itself is around risk management and protection. And the tech, or the H part, is that one of our key offerings or key services is technology, bringing everything to life through the use of technology. We call our system Protecht ERM. We've been going about 27 years now. I was one of the original founders of Protecht, and we've got around about 500 clients across primarily APAC, the UK or EMEA and North America. I won't go on about what we do too much, except to say that our most, I guess, prized possession on this slide is the top right, which is our customer retention rate, which put very simply is if we have 100 customers at the beginning of a year, without adding any more on, we're going to have 98 at the end. And that's really our key to our philosophy, which is customer satisfaction. And if you keep your customers happy, they stay. So down the bottom is a few of our clients within the kind of aged care space, but that's enough about me and Protecht. So Chris, if I could hand over to you for a quick introduction and a little bit about yourself and law compliance. Chris.
Yes, good morning everyone. Thank you, David. Good morning everyone. A number of our clients on the webinar this morning, so thank you very much for your ongoing support. So we work very closely with Protecht. For those of you that don't know, we're a law firm established over 23 years ago. Probably need to update the slide now. I think this is our 23rd year. But again, one of the reasons that we work so closely with Protecht is that we have a genuine commitment to client service and excellence. We deliver specialist legislative compliance solutions to hundreds of clients, so it's all we do. As I say, you don't need too much imagination to look at our name and work out what we do. So we specialise in enterprise-wide solutions. We identify and monitor all Commonwealth, state and territory legislation. Clearly, the significant introduction of the Aged Care Act has kept the team very busy. We've got a range of products that are easily integratable with Protecht. But thanks for your time. I know it's a very, very busy time of year, so hopefully this will be practical and everyone on the call will get something out of it.
Right, thank you, Chris. And just so you appreciate what we're going to do over the next 60 minutes, we're in the middle of the intro. Obviously, the presentation will go for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A and conclusions at the end, which means as we go through the webinar, please enter your questions into the question panel, into the GoToWebinar platform. That way we can see the questions as they come through and be ready to answer them at the end. There will also be a post-webinar questionnaire for you, just to give us feedback so that we can factor any comments you've got into making our webinars better. And also everybody asks, so yes, the answer is we will provide a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar after for your record, and obviously if you wish to share with any of your colleagues as well. Now, I guess the principle behind, or the philosophy behind the webinar this morning, and the philosophy of both law compliance and Protecht, is really this: is regulation and compliance should not be a box ticking exercise. We hear that all the time. but yet we still go and find new clients who are going through the process of making sure they tick the box of every obligation, and if they do, they go, we're done. And I think the issue for us is completely missing the point. This Act and the compliance obligations within it should be used as a catalyst to do better, and particularly focus on the better outcomes for our older people. And so if we can now merge the principle of the Act with compliance obligations, with risk management, with better outcomes, we are going to uplift the quality of everything we do, and at the same time make ourselves more efficient. And that really is the philosophy. Now, in terms of what we're going to cover in this webinar, we're going to cover really 5 things. First of all, Chris is going to take us through an experience of the first 30 days of the Act. How have your feet been going under the table? Number 2, thinking about compliance into practice. How do we use the requirements of the Act to make our processes and our outcomes better? How do we link and merge them together? Then we're going to focus on a bit of a deep dive into whistleblowing and incident management as our deep dives, to practically think about implementing, and also then showing that really practically, bringing it to life with an example of what we do as a firm. Finally, a few keys to success, and then we'll move to Q&A after that. So Chris, if I can hand over to you for the first 30 days, and then I'll take back when we talk about compliance into practice. Chris.
Sure, thanks, David. So we've been working with many clients for months, and particularly in the last 30 days. And most of our clients, the first conversation that we have with them, they say is, here's where we are, how are we going, how's everyone else going? So there's a bit of sort of informal industry benchmarking going on in terms of how people are navigating the Act and the requirement. And I think clearly there's an understanding from everyone in the sector, be they providers, advisors, regulators, that this is a really significant change, and one that is taking some time to make its way through the system. So I've just put down here some of the key observations, I guess, that the team and I have made over the last sort of month as it's gone live, and many of these have clearly been issues that have been worked on up until the commencement on the 1st of November. But I think it's fair to say that there have been and continue to be significant changes that are being required and implemented. Most, if not all, of the key documents, policies, systems and controls are being updated and amended, and that's including your finance system, your resident system, your incident management system, your whistleblowing system. And I guess it was a part of that reason why we decided to focus on whistleblowing and incident. The key documents and policies are all requiring work. There is clearly increased focus on workforce. That's nothing new for people that are working in this sector, but continues to be a focus. There is clearly increased legal and compliance costs. I know that's not something that you are particularly excited about. However, the reality of the world is that, particularly where we've got these sorts of higher concerned, certainly from a government and an oversight perspective, industries, the certainly increased legal and compliance costs. So it's really, how do you deal with it efficiently to get some productivity gains out of it, as opposed to just simply adding cost onto your cost base. As a part of that, there's clearly increased focus on the digital transformation and productivity gains. David will talk about that. The other thing that we're seeing that perhaps was a little unexpected, but we're seeing this with many of our large clients, is this focus on the interaction between the Aged Care Act and the NDIS requirements. So that's particularly where you might have a client or a resident that is subject to different funding streams, subject to different policies, subject to different reporting requirements. Most of those issues are being worked through, but I would say that is something that we're seeing. So no doubt many of you on the call are also working through some of those issues. Governance structures and oversight. So this is really your board oversight or your committee oversight are being tested for fitness for purpose. And again, something that we didn't particularly envisage, but we are seeing a number of our clients reach out to us and asking for an independent implementation and compliance assessment. So many of the boards who are now themselves facing additional personal liability are saying to their executive teams, okay, how can we actually gain some comfort that we're doing everything that we can? So that's something that we haven't seen before. And I guess given the magnitude of the change to the sector, it's not entirely surprising. Many of you will be very familiar with the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. Again, they've been very proactive in this change. I would have to commend them all on the quality of their website. For those of you that have not been to their website, I would really encourage you to do so. I think it's a really fabulous website. In terms of the priorities that have been stated and telegraphed, clearly, as you would expect, given the transition, provider registration and suitability is a key issue. There are a number of other issues there that you should all be familiar with. The one that I want to draw out is, again, serious incident response and reporting obligations. Now, that's not a new concept. That has certainly been in the old Act, but it has certainly been tightened up, and we will talk about that. And also this concept of continuous improvement and risk proportionate regulatory oversight, which again is something that we're starting to see in most of these major industry regulatory transformations, and certainly we're seeing it in aged care. And I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the Commission's well-intentioned and well-telegraphed position that there will be no grace period. So you are now expected to be compliant, and hopefully this webinar will assist you in that endeavour. Thanks, David.
And that's a great segue, I guess, into our first poll. And those that attend our webinars know that there's no free lunch, so we need to get you to interact if you can. Anonymous, of course, be as open as you can. But to launch our first poll, as it says on the board here, where is your organisation in terms of implementing the required changes to meet the new Aged Care Act? We've got 4 levels, and I'll launch it now in about 30 seconds for you to answer, and then I'll close and share the results. And if you've got any comments on the results, Chris, then please comment. "15 seconds and I'll close. Okay, 5 and close. Okay, I'm going to share with everyone. So, Chris, we've got 3%, 37, 60, and no one is ahead of target, which is not a surprise. Any comments, Chris?
I think that would be broadly reflective of what we're seeing. I mean, I think, there is a significant, resource and timing requirement to get compliant with the Act, and clearly this is one of those situations where providers are trying to fly the plane at the same time as they're building the plane. So I would say that is broadly reflective of what we're seeing across our client base as well.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely reasonable. We're seeing something very similar. So thank you. Thank you everyone for participating, and we will have 2 more polls, so don't sit back too quickly. Before we do that, however, let's go to the principles of compliance into practice, and it really is taking the, I guess, requirements of the Act, and rather than seeing them as a tick the box exercise, turning them into day-to-day practice, which is exactly what the regulators and the industry is expecting. Now, obviously, this is a very large topic, so I'm going to give the principles at the highest level as the way that we see the interaction between outcomes, objectives, obligations, risks, risk management, and so on. How does it fit together? And at Protecht, we use the concept at, say, board and executive level of the pyramid. And this, and you'll see it as it develops, the pyramid really is the way that we show the linkage between risk, compliance, and outcomes. Now, let's start with the word risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, coming from the ISO 31000 standard. And so the starting point for everything we do from a risk perspective and from a business perspective should be our outcomes. Now, we typically have our vision or mission, and that then moves down at a more granular level to operational objectives: run the service provider, run the aged care provider, and strategic objectives, which is all about the objectives to change the provider, to change your business. Now, that is the top of the pyramid, and these are our objectives, our desired outcomes. Why are we here? Now, for the Aged Care Act, the #1 here, operational objectives, is great outcomes, better outcomes for older persons. Now, that's the main one we should have as in golden lights. We should also, though, remember we've got things such as the well-being of our people and interested parties. We've got staff satisfaction, we've got reputation and brand, we've got compliance, meeting our compliance requirements, we've got ESG type objectives. So you need to work out what your operational objectives are, but under the Act, the key one is better outcomes for our older persons. Now, that is the outcome. That is the end. What's the means to the end? In order to deliver against these objectives, we need firstly a great operating model. Our inputs, outputs, processes, the things that we do every day, to deliver against those objectives. On the strategic side, we need strategic projects that are developed and delivered on time, quality, and within budget. Now, when those projects get delivered, they will make a permanent change to the operating model by being delivered into the operating model. Now, this layer here is our critical processes and projects, what's required to deliver against those outcomes. Now we move into what could mess up those critical processes and projects. Yes, the wonderful world of risk, operational and financial risk, strategic and project risk, and that layer there is our layer of risk. Now, what's left to do is to manage those risks, which is effectively managing the effect of uncertainty on our objectives. And we therefore have operational financial risk management, strategic and project risk management, change and delivered risk management, so we don't deliver major problems into our business when we deliver major strategic projects. Now, the final piece of the puzzle then is compliance management, and that lower layer is now what we typically call GRC, or governance, risk and compliance, and we at Protecht also call it enterprise risk management, or ERM, which captures compliance as well. So how does it all fit together? There's one more element that I need to address to show how it fits together, and that is the layer of risk. And one of the most important things you need to have at board and executive level is a risk appetite. And risk appetite is the maximum amount of risk that you are willing to take in order to achieve your outcomes, desired outcomes. So it is effectively a barrier around that layer, is the largest size that that third layer can be. How big can your risks be? Now, that is determined by you internally. Internally, what is your level of risk appetite? However, there is a second risk appetite we need to apply, and that is the risk appetite of our society. And our society risk appetite, the maximum risk that we can take and we can impact upon all of our stakeholders, is determined by regulators and society norms, which are often translated into obligations. And therefore, we have a second risk appetite, which is our compliance obligations. Now, as long as we have no appetite to breach compliance obligations, regulatory obligations, which I hope is true, you would then apply the lower of your personal risk appetite or the risk appetite of society. Best analogy, if you're going along a country road and the speed limit is 100, that is society's risk appetite. If yours is 90, you will go at 90. If the society's appetite is 100 kilometers an hour and you think you're quite happy to go at 120, if you have no appetite to not comply, you will go 100. So it is always the lower of your personal risk appetite or society's. Now that is where compliance management fits in, and that is where your obligations fit in. Now, fundamentally, our Act is fundamentally about managing key risks for better outcomes, and that is the purpose of the Act. If you take this approach, then you are now merging the Act compliance obligations with your risk management, with your governance, with your operating model and your projects and your processes, and all focused on better outcomes. I always say this to people, but I often say to myself that I'm a risk and compliance manager, but I'm much cooler when I say I'm an outcome manager. And the transformation that all of you are going through in terms of the Act, the word outcomes, better outcomes, should always be top of mind or top of voice whenever we are making this transformation, so we do not lose sight of why we are doing it. Now, what we're now going to do is we'll get practical, and we're going to look at a focus on two areas of the Act. As I mentioned, we haven't got time to do all of them, and we're going to focus on whistleblowing and incident management as little two separate case studies to get really practical. So the first one we're going to look at is whistleblowing, and I'll set out the main elements of it, and Chris will then provide some greater depth into some of these areas. Now, the Act requires us that we must maintain a complaints and feedback management system and a whistleblower system. So maybe Chris, if you could just take us through a couple of the key components of both of these requirements. Firstly, the whistleblower system, and then we'll do complaints and feedback. Chris.
Sure. So the whistleblower system, I think, is really important sort of statutory pathway. So I guess the key difference between a whistleblower system and an incident management or complaint system, which we'll talk about in a minute, is that if eligible, disclosures gain statutory protection, including against any civil, criminal or administrative liability for making the disclosure. And very importantly, and many of you will be familiar with this concept, the Corporations Act also has a separate whistleblower regime. And again, we don't have time to go into the details, but it's very important that if you're a corporation or covered by the Corporations Act, you will now be covered by 2 whistleblower systems. So again, it just sort of shows the increasing complexity that providers, particularly those with a corporate overlay, are needing to navigate. The pathway whistleblower regime is designed for more serious concerns, including misconduct, systemic failures, breaches of the Act, abuse or neglect. Anonymity and protection from reprisal are particularly important, and we'll talk about those in a little more detail, but that's a very quick snapshot. But it's really about the protection against reprisal and any subsequent adverse outcomes. In terms of the complaints and feedback system, many of you will be familiar with these systems. So these can cover a broad range of issues: quality of care, dare I say it, quality of food, which many of you know that will be experiencing on a regular basis from some of your residents, service delivery, rights under the Act, mistreatment, neglect, service standards. Complaints can be made verbally or in writing. Anonymity is permitted, but often the anonymity pathway is not taken by the complainant because they actually want their complaint resolved, and it's very difficult to actually resolve a complaint if you don't know on whose behalf you are resolving the complaint. The route does tend to be more open and collaborative, but from your perspective as providers and stakeholders, importantly, residents generally will have an option as to which of those 2 pathways they go down.
Fantastic, Chris, thank you. And the second key requirement, we must have a whistleblower policy. And what are the key components of that policy, Chris?
So whistleblower policy is a significant undertaking and one that we've been spending a fair bit of time working with clients on. And again, it is fairly extensive in its requirements, and I put the requirements there. They must contain purpose and scope, who can make a disclosure, what can be reported, who are eligible recipients, and there's a list of eligible recipients in the Act and available on the various regulatory websites, how to report, processes, confidentiality, a clear statement in terms of the protection from retaliation, and then some support and responsibilities. So these policies are significant. In many cases, they run to, 4 to 5+ pages. So I would encourage you all to ensure that your whistleblower policy is where it needs to be. It's a really important document in the scheme of operators' day-to-day activities.
And a policy is critical, but I always have a practical lens that a policy ends up being a piece of paper. It's bringing the policy to life that is really key, which is where the practical application of it comes on. But application or a process or a requirement that doesn't have a policy tends to be weaker. So a policy supports the process. Now, the next issue is that all staff, including our volunteers, must be trained in respect of whistleblowing, and we're obviously focused on the whistleblowing part here. So we've got to provide appropriate training, and that training is so essential that the appropriate process is followed, given the sensitivities in relating to whistleblowing. Thirdly, there is a broadened range of entities which whistleblowers can report to their concerns to than was previously required. So you've got to be able to capture that within your process. As Chris mentioned, the importance of anonymity and confidentiality, and you'll see a little bit later when we look at the process how we deal with that. Also, protection from retaliation, linked to that in many ways. How are you going to be able to do that? And then the system must also cover associated persons and workers. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of the requirements. Obviously, each one of you will go into great detail, but I then wanted to start bringing it to life. And the first way I'm going to do that is like a little process map, and it's just an example. And then a little bit later, we'll bring that to life through showing you a worked example. So if we take the whistleblowing process, we've divided this up into really 4 main sections. Number 1, the whistleblower themselves. Then once we receive that information, the triaging of it, and then assigning the investigator, an investigation being done all the way through to closure, and then appropriate reporting from that. Now, you might have 5 layers, 3 layers. I'm just giving an example. So firstly, whistleblowing needs to capture both internal and external whistleblowers. And we've then at this stage got to really ensure whether the person wants anonymity or not. If they don't want anonymity, then straight away we can get the details of that particular individual. But if they do want anonymity, we now jump straight into the incident recording the details. First of all is the incident category, and again I won't spend too much time on the details of each of these boxes because you'll see that come into life a little bit later. You then record the incident details, getting all the pertinent points of the incident. You then need to address and question the whistleblower and deal with their fear of punishment, so this issue that we discussed earlier. Also then the collection of supporting documentation that may be available with respect to the incident, with respect to the whistleblowing, whether that be documentation, photos, evidence, whatever it might be. Then we need to get a declaration from the whistleblower that they are comfortable with everything that they have entered here, all the details, and they're effectively declaring that yes, they're comfortable with that. Once we've got that, we would then effectively submit it, and that would then move the information and the whistleblowing incident event over to the triage. Now that should be done automatically once that's submitted. Once the triager gets it, they will then do a full review of the whistleblowing. And obviously, based on that, there may be some actions that come out of it. There may be some clarifications needed and so on. Once they've reviewed it, they will then assign an investigator, and that will then automatically be notified over to the investigator. The investigator then would do a full-blown investigation, and from it determine whether any actions are required. Those actions taken in terms both internally and externally, particularly around actions requiring improvements with our internal processes. And from there, we would move to then closing the incident, and that would then trigger appropriate reporting, and that might be detailed reporting to specific individuals, but also more general reporting with other whistleblowing incidents, which would then go up to executive and board reporting. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect, but it's an example of a flow process that covers the whistleblowing process. A little bit later, as I said, we will bring that to life so you can see it work through in terms of a worked example. So what I want to do now is go to our second polling question. And while I'm opening up, just have a quick read. How advanced is your process for whistleblowing and complaints management under the new Act? Where are you at with that? So launch it, 30 seconds as before, and then we'll analyse the results. Okay, 15 seconds. Okay, 5 and close. Okay, I'll close and share those. And we've got a nice probability distribution here, slightly skewed to behind, which is what we're kind of seeing in terms of practical application here. There is so much to do trying to get all of this working. The issue that we run into is if we do a quick fix, it's not going to take us and embed it into an ongoing good process for the future. We might have to go back and rework, which becomes inefficient. So we've got the majority of you processes completed and being implemented. Well done. 13% fully completed and fully embedded. Excellent. And about a third of you are being very honest about behind where you need to be. And obviously we're not addressing any of those answers against particular providers, the size of the provider, where they are, but just interesting observation. Now, once we've done and had a look at whistleblowing, what I want to do now is move across to have a look at incident management as our second deeper dive. And as we did before, I'll just go through the major areas of incident management, and then Chris will be able to fill in some of the detail. So first of all, it's a condition of our registration that aged care providers implement and maintain an incident management system, IMS for short, in accordance with the rules. So Chris, what does incident management system, key requirements of it?
Yeah, thank you, David. So again, the IMS, or as referred to, the incident management system, is not a new concept, but it has been tightened up, I think you would say, as part of the new Act. And it is fairly, again, broad and expansive in terms of its inclusions, and I won't go through all of them, but clearly, and there are some questions coming through which I'd encourage people to keep sending through, some really, really nice, good, considered questions which we'll get to. But clearly the most important thing that an incident management needs to do is it needs to exist. So it needs to establish an appropriate governance and operational framework, and that's sort of one of the things that David's talking about. It then does need to record all incidents and near misses. And one of the questions which I'll just bring in now, David, and I'll sort of answer them as I go, which is how do we work out if an incident management system is operating? And if we've got no incidents, does that mean that we're doing well or we're not doing so well? I think for those of us that have, got a little bit of grey hair or no hair, I've got no hair, David's got the grey hair. I think it's fair to say that if you've got a meaningful enterprise, it is highly unlikely that there will be no incidents. So I think clearly it goes to the training, it goes to the enforcement, and I use that word with a soft E, not a hard E, but it goes to the enforcement or the assurance of a safety and reporting culture. I think having a system in place that people are well trained on and is easy to use goes a long way, and almost having an easily accessible, well-trained system is almost the lead indicator. If you don't have that in place, then you're probably not going to get many incidents reported. And I think the other point which I'd make here is, as part of an incident management system, which is a reasonably new addition, is that it does require the provider to conduct a regular review of the incident management to ensure continuous process of improvement. So again, it must be embedded into the formal governance framework. And one of the other questions was, given some of the changes to governance, how do we keep our boards up to date? The first important, and I just say this sort of regularly to clients, is you need to be aware of what your legal obligations are. It is very difficult to be compliant with your legal obligations if you don't know what they are. And there have been a significant increase in both the governance expectations and the governance load on boards under the new Act. And I'd say the starting point would be either through us or through someone else. You need to understand what you are trying to comply with and then put places in place to comply with it.
Yeah. Fantastic, Chris, thank you. Secondly, as with whistleblowing, we must have an incident management policy. And again, Chris, putting you in the firing line, key components of that policy. Again,
similar to a whistleblowing policy, but I'd have to say, again, based on our recent experience, most providers have got a fairly fit for purpose incident management policy. So reasonably minor amendments are being made to those. But again, for those of you who are not familiar, it is required to cover roles and responsibilities, the identification, recording and reporting of reportable risks, notifying of other incidents, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then it does also require how you are going to provide support to those affected by an incident. And again, I'd refer people to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, which has got significant detail on what should be included in an incident management policy.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. Next, the IMS must record any event that has caused or could reasonably cause harm to older person receiving care. So typically, what do we see in these incident management systems in terms of recording? Now, I'm not going to go through each of the detailed bullet points, but typically we use the who, the what, the where, the when, and the how. And underneath each of those, we've got a range of questions. Now, a lot of them are common sense, but it gives a little bit of a checklist when you are designing your process, the kind of information you need to be recording. Right. Now, one of the other questions is the issue of reportable and non-reportable incidents. And Chris, I'm going to hand over to you just to briefly give us some examples of the non-reportables and the reportables. Firstly, non-reportables.
Yeah, so this is a really important issue and one that I do hope that everyone on the call is aware of. So the Act, and we'll talk about the serious incident reporting scheme in a minute, but we're now talking about non-reportable incidents insofar as they're not reportable under the serious incident reporting scheme. Notwithstanding that they're not reportable, they are, if I can use the phrase, recordable. So they do need to be recorded in your incident management system. And these include near misses, medication incidents, clinical deterioration, environmental equipment hazards, behavioural incidents, service delivery failures, and staff misconduct affecting care quality. And again, it is really important, I think, that each of the providers, as they're thinking about how do we actually understand, what is happening in our facilities and in our different operations, it's really important to get a view on non-reportable incidents, because non-reportable incidents, if they're not tracked appropriately, if obviously don't give you any trend analysis. If they are tracked appropriately, they can give you some trend analysis that you can potentially put some interventions in place, and hopefully the interventions will result in the avoidance of any serious incidents that are ultimately reportable. So it's really important that the non-reportable incidents are recorded. In terms of the reportable incidents under the Act, so again, there are 8 broad categories. Many of these will be familiar to most people on the call. They have been tightened up. The definitions have been expanded in some cases, particularly this concept of neglect has been tightened up significantly. I don't want to say it's a catch-all, but it has been tightened up. And I think those of us that have been in the industry for a period of time, we know neglect when we see it. And I think perhaps the old Act was a little soft in terms of the inclusion under that definition, and that has certainly been tightened up. And the other thing is the reportable incidents have now been aligned with the new rights-based framework. But really important that you understand each of those categories, and that again, the report is occurring. The other point is that there are different reportable time frames under this SEARS response scheme, which we've spoken about. So this is a well-known national regulatory framework. Scheme is administered by the Commission and it sits alongside the other regulatory obligations. It is the centrepiece of the incident reporting response for both providers and regulators. And again, if you have a priority 1 serious incident response, it needs to be notified to the relevant authorities and regulators within 24 hours. So it is really important that the systems are in place, the training is in place, people understand what is a reportable incident, and the regulator has made it very clear, in my view, quite reasonably, that the appropriate training and management and ongoing assistance provided in respect of SEARS will be a really important consideration of the regulator moving forward.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. And as for whistleblowing, staff obviously have to be trained in this process, critically important and continually trained. It's one of those areas that can be forgotten about depending on how many incidents you have, new staff coming in, and the process can go off the rails, and I've had personal experience of that, so keep the training up. Now, as we spoke about before, a little example of what an incident management process might look like, and we'll bring it to life in a few minutes. In this instance, we've got the incident reporter, the assessor, the investigator, and finally reporting. So first of all, details of the incident, then potentially add attachments if you've got any information that you need to attach. Then analyze the incident. Now, I've particularly added in AI there because the example I'm going to give you is where we're using AI to take the description of the incident from the person who's reporting it in a way that they wish to report it, and then using AI to extract each of the important bits of information that are required in the incident. We'll show you that later. And then form field filling, rather than the individual having to fill up 20 different forms, utilize AI to do that. Just makes the process way more effective and efficient. Then having a look with the individual, making sure that the AI fields that have been completed have been reviewed, and that's why we are not replacing the human with AI, we are assisting the human with AI, but they get the final say. The reason I'm doing that is just it's a process we're using at the moment, and given that we've got time deficient, most of us, to make a very speedy way of managing an incident or reporting an incident is going to be key. Then form completion and then submission of that form. It then goes over to our incident assessor, notification automatically, then an assessment is done of that incident, and once that's done, it's then submitted into the investigator. The investigator then takes that incident and then does root cause analysis. Why did that incident occur? And from there, the most important part of an incident in many ways is the lessons learned, and this is then able to be used for continuous improvement. In addition, we may need to have regulatory communications, and then in addition, doing an overall risk assessment of the incident in terms of how important is this incident and what level of attention should be given to it. Also, very importantly, adding any additional details that we need around the incident, and from there we then close the incident, and it is then, we add management actions, which is any improvements that need to be made, any changes we need to make to a process. and then from there, evaluation, sign off, and closure of the incident. This then triggers our reporting, notifications and reporting. That is an example we'll take you through in a second. But finally, last poll for you all is a quick question about what systems are you using for incident management. And you've got a range here, and I've obviously dropped in other as well in terms of this. So I'm just going to have to I don't think I shared the previous one. Do bear with me 1 second. I don't think I shared the results. So now I'm going to hide. Sorry guys, just clicking the wrong buttons here. Here we go, launch. So you've got 4 together with an other, again 30 seconds. If you can just share what you're currently using would be useful. So 15 seconds. Okay, 5 and close. We've got a good response level. Okay, and I'm going to now share with you all. So exactly half of you have a dedicated incident system, a point solution, which is very common. A third of you, as part of your wider GRC system, fantastic. And then just a minority using email, MS tools, Excel, manual, paper-based, and so on. Obviously, as a firm, we are big fans of the fourth one, which is the GRC system. Why? Because you can now start linking all of that incident information to all the other information you have about your risks, compliance obligations, and getting a much more integrated view and a much more kind of from cold face to board or from ward to board view of risk management. So that is your final poll. Thank you for participating. And what we're going to do now is our final piece before we go to our Q&A is bringing the 2 examples we did, whistleblowing and incident management, to life. So the first one we're going to do is whistleblowing, and just reminding you of example process. And here is an example of the background into the whistleblowing. I won't read everything out, but basically we've got a resident that has observed improper conduct within the aged care facility, multiple incidents they've identified, protocols not being followed, and so on. And they want to be able to report that through to the organisation through the whistleblowing process. So I've now got Tyler, who's going to join us, who's joined us to take us through this process, and hopefully it gives you an idea practically what this might look like as a system supported process. Tyler.
Thank you very much, David. Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler, and in this video, I'm going to run through the whistleblower report scenario. In this scenario, we're going to cover off the submission, the triage, investigation, and finally the closure of a whistleblower report. Keep in mind that the form that you're seeing on screen here can be accessed by internal staff or members of the public via an embedded URL into a website. We begin our journey under the reported details section, and we're asking the reporter whether or not they're willing to provide their personal details. If yes, relevant fields will appear, and here we can see that Jane has populated some personal information. This includes consenting to being contacted, which will support us in sending follow-up workflow notifications. We then move into the whistleblowing category section, and here Jane has selected resident safety and care concerns. Next, we move into the incident detail section, and Jane has populated a summary of her concern and a detailed description of the alleged wrongdoing. What Jane has indicated is 2 particular scenarios that she has seen on repeat. So one is a resident waited for more than 45 minutes for assistance despite showing signs of distress, and in another, medication administration records were marked as completed even though the medication round had not yet commenced. Jane continues to state that these scenarios may indicate a breach of aged care quality standards, particularly Standard 3, personal care and clinical care, and Standard 8, organisational governance. Jane will continue populating the relevant fields in this section before getting down to the fear of punishment or unfair treatment section. Here, Jane has indicated that yes, she is concerned about unfair treatment, and she has provided a description about her concern. Moving on, Jane can then use the supporting documentation section to upload files, photos, witness statements, etc., along with applying a description of the documents that were uploaded. Prior to submission, we then have a declaration section, and we ask Jane to confirm that the information is true to the best of her knowledge, and to acknowledge that submitting knowingly false information may be an offence. At this point, Jane can click on the submit button, and this will trigger a workflow notification email to the triage team member. The triage team member will then access the record via that email notification and land directly onto the form. Via the triage and investigation tab here, they'll input their triage notes, they'll assign an investigator and a priority. Once done, they can click on the submit for investigation button. And just like before, a workflow notification email will be sent to the investigator. The investigator will then access the form and they will see the investigation and outcome section. They'll provide their investigation summary, their findings, whether the claim is substantiated, and then they'll state whether actions are required or not. In this case, actions are required and 2 actions have been created and assigned out. Once actions are created, the investigator can state the date that they're going to close the report, add in their final closure commentary notes, and then simply click on the close report button. At this point, the whistleblower report will then make its way into the other relevant whistleblower report dashboards and incident reporting dashboards.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tyler. So that's an example of whistleblowing. And now the final piece is the incident management process. And as I mentioned, this is where we're going to also illustrate the use of AI to assist in the process of taking it from how people see an incident and the words they use to be able to then create the appropriate forms and the appropriate data fields. Now, in this particular example, we've got a home care incident and we've got a fall in the kitchen and the sustaining of injury. So with that example, again, I'm going to hand over to Tyler, who will take us through what this looks like. And as I said, particularly, we're going to also utilize a kind of AI to help us here to give you an illustration of how AI can make the process more efficient. Tyler.
Hi, everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be running through the home care incident reporting scenario. Now, in this scenario, I'm going to be using our new AI feature called Cognita. And on the screen here, we can see a form called Report an Incident. Now, this form simply has one field, this text box here, and what we're asking is for the reporter to describe what has happened in their own words. Now, Cognita requires as much detail as possible to accurately populate an incident report, so we also have this suggestion box here that just details some of the key information we'd like in the description. I'm going to go ahead and paste in pre-prepared description that I have of an incident. And then I'll scroll down and we have an attachment field here as well. So any witness statements, photos, or any other files can be added here and will then be automatically uploaded to the incident report once it's generated. Then user will then click on Analyze My Description. And this loading screen here is just showing that Cognita is now analyzing that description, extracting key details, and pre-filling the form. Once the form is ready, we'll see that all of the fields on the form have been pre-populated with information. However, all of that information is still editable by the user. Okay, so this is our incident report form here, currently in a draft status with the ability to submit it for review. But first, as the reporter, I'm going to review the details that have been auto-populated. Now, what you'll see with all of these fields that have been auto-populated, there are these headings above them. So if we have a look at one example, such as incident classification, we can see that Cognita has put in full with injury moderate, and it states that it's been drafted by AI. So as the name suggests, it's simply stating that this value has been placed here by AI. I can go ahead and change this value, and that title will change to user modified. This allows anybody else then to track which pieces of data has been input by the AI and which pieces have been either added or modified by the user. We can also interact with Cognita on the right-hand menu here. So you can see this body of text is my original description. That allows me to compare my original description to the information that Cognita has auto-populated. I can also just go ahead and chat in here and ask particular questions to get additional output from Cognita. I can now go ahead and click on the Submit for Review button, which is going to trigger a notification to the assessor. I can move over to the assessment section, and here I can also use Cognita to support my assessment of the incident. So it's not just for the incident reporter. So for example, I may go ahead and put in the date myself, and I can get Cognita to suggest that initial severity rating for me. And we can see in the bottom right here, Cognita is now loading. Provided a suggestion here, so moderate. I'll go ahead and accept that suggestion, and we can see that that value has now populated. Now, thing to note here is that Cognita doesn't just paste text into fields, it will actually analyze the field values that you already have and work out which one is the most fitting. Next, the assessor would click on the Submit for Investigation button. And this will open up the investigation section and management review section. Cognita is now also able to help the investigator, and the investigator wants to perform a 5-whys root cause analysis. So we can click on Suggest. I want Cognita to provide me with my first why, what it should be. And we can see that loading. And there's that first why. And just like before, I can hit accept suggestion, or I can review and add myself. In this case, I'll accept it again. And so that's dropped in there. I can now ask for, well, what are the contributing factors for that first why that you've just given me? So again, Cognita loads, provides me what that root cause is. And if I'm happy with that, I can go ahead and accept the suggestion as well. But like I said, if I wanted to change anything here, I can simply click in the text box and just change any of these elements that I need to. So as the investigator, I can simply continue getting Cognita to help me, suggesting what my next why should be, and suggesting what those causes or contributing factors may be. Moving on, the investigator would then add their lessons learned, they can add their regulated communications, and they can also perform a risk assessment against a related risk that is relevant to this home care incident. From here, the investigator would then move on to the management review section. And here is where they can perform open disclosure, add in any quality improvement actions, or link in impacted aged care quality standards. From there, the investigator would add in an evaluation of the incident response and some key date fields and sign off. Once ready, they can go ahead and submit for closure. And this incident report form is now closed, and it would also have been added to relevant incident reporting dashboards.
Fantastic, Tyler. So the purpose of that was to really make this very, very practical. I hope you got something out of it as a way of looking at how do we practically solve and embed these processes, these requirements into our day-to-day. Now, what I'd like to do now is, Chris, you've been monitoring the question box. I just wonder if you could pick up a first question. We'll answer a couple of them, and then we'll just do our final kind of conclusions and key takeaways. But Chris, maybe grab one of the questions and please fire away.
Thanks, David. Yeah, one of the questions, they're all good questions. One of the questions was, what are people underestimating in respect of the incident management scheme and the whistleblowing requirements? And I've just got 3 sort of points here, and they'll apply in different degrees to providers and circumstances. I think the one thing that people are generally underestimating is the training requirement. I mean, it is a requirement that all staff, including volunteers, are trained. And the regulators made it clear that to the extent this training needs to occur in languages other than English, it is an expectation that this training does occur. So I think training, David, would be one area. And clearly we understand that training takes people away from their day-to-day responsibilities, but it's really important that training does get scheduled, documented and recorded. The second point is the documentary update. So as we've spoken about, both the IMS and the whistleblowing regimes did occur under the previous Act, but it is most likely that these core documents will need to be updated to reflect some of the new requirements. Most clients and most providers are going through that, but that's something that I would look at. And the third point, which also touches on an earlier question, which was, it's great, even if you do the training and even if your documents are updated, there still needs to be a critical view and a critical assessment of the system use and reporting levels. So clearly, if you're running a business and you've got 600 beds and you haven't had an incident reported in the last month, it's fair to say there's probably been a breakdown somewhere, which then leads to, I guess, my final point on this, which is it's really important, and the new Act sort of requires this, that there is this culture of safety and compliance. So you need to be doing everything that you can do in terms of, rewarding and celebrating compliance champions who perhaps are doing things that they might feel, a little reluctant to do, which may include reporting various incidents or dealing with circumstances. So that's one question. David, the second question, which again is a really good question, is can the policies be added to a residence agreement? Certainly it's a requirement under the Act that the policies are made available. I guess it's a matter for individual providers whether or not they actually formally should be affixed to a resident agreement, or what we have seen is so many of our clients are providing the policies as part of a welcome pack. So, your welcome pack can cover the activities and it can cover the food and it can cover the transport relationships, the doctor's relationships, and it can also include some of these core policies. But, to the extent that you wanted to formally include it as part of the agreement, I would probably suggest you get legal advice, because obviously you don't necessarily want to write a policy into a formal contract, because that policy will change as the Act changes. So you want to make sure that you maintain some flexibility in maintaining adherence with the Act, as long as those policies are accessible.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Chris. Now, we are going to answer the questions we don't get to by way of blog afterwards. So we will get back to you on that and send that out to you. But probably one more just before we do our final comments is how should aged care providers measure whether their compliance framework, and I'm going to add the word risk as well, compliance risk rate is working beyond simply no incidents logged. What KPIs or leading indicators would you recommend? What a brilliant, brilliant question. So in the time that I've got available, one of the things we do at Protecht across all our clients is we run what we call a risk and compliance culture dashboard. And what that culture is really the behaviours of our people and our processes with respect to managing compliance and risk. And we have a whole range of indicators, leading, lagging indicators and so on, which are then used to aggregate to an overall kind of risk and compliance culture score. And that will be covering all things such as, the number of incidents not reported within the required time frame. And this picks up whether we find an incident a year after it happened, no one ever reported it. Sometimes we also have an indicator of trends where we have no incidents being recorded, yet we've got indicators, risk indicators and control indicators that are kind of showing red. Doesn't make a lot of sense that you're not getting a consistent view. So the best way to think about this is, yes, incidents logged is the ultimate end game of this, but there's a whole bunch of indicators that you can use that gives you the behaviours of our people, behaviours of our processes way before an incident ever occurs, which makes those indicators more leading. That's a topic we could do a whole webinar on, but we will make a few more comments when we write the blog and get back to you on that. Now, in order to conclude, just a few key takeaways, keys to success. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these. Firstly, the focus on better outcomes rather than being a compliance exercise. You'll get the hearts, minds and souls of the organisation behind you, which I think if it's just to comply, you won't. Get the process right the first time. Try not to do quick fixes because they will not be sustainable. Make the process efficient, effective and engaging as you can, because risk and compliance processes can be seen as a bit dull. especially when not linked to outcomes, and people drop them off very quickly. Use appropriate technology. We might be biased, but this technology is a way of really embedding this in the business in a really efficient and engaging way. And embed the solutions into day-to-day. Don't have them as an added extra add-on. And where obviously appropriate, get expert help. Chris, maybe finally just pick up a couple of your key points in the minute or so that we've got left, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah, look, the slides will be going out, so I won't go through these other than the sentences highlighted in bold. So I think clearly, you know, it's not too late. One of my favourite sayings is the best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago. Second best time is today. So clearly, we've seen from some of those polls that you know, people on the call are at different stages of their maturity and evolution. And I just thought it was really important for some of you that are sort of wondering where to and you're a bit overwhelmed by it. You know, what sort of process and framework could you be thinking about? So again, I always start this with understanding the requirements of the Aged Care Act, its impact on your people, processes, documents and systems. You then need a plan, as we've spoken about, plan and design the transformation roadmap. You don't need to call it a transformation roadmap, but you know, just plan and design a roadmap. Then implement the plan and execute with discipline. We understand that all organisations have got limited resources and limited both HR and financial resources, so execute with discipline. Monitor and track the performance, really important. It doesn't need to be particularly elaborate, but it does need to be monitored and tracked. And then the final point there is review, evaluate and refine. And I think, you know, for organisations, irrespective of their size, you know, small, medium, large, extra large, that sort of program or methodology can be designed to be fit for purpose. So I encourage everyone to read the slides. David, given time, that's probably all I want to say.
That's fantastic, and I do appreciate that we've got an incident now, which is we've gone 1 minute over, Chris. So what I'm going to do is just say a huge thank you to you, Chris. Amazing information that you've shared. Really appreciate your time, and a massive thank you to all of you that have attended for this 1 hour. I know it's very valuable and a scarce time for you. Please, if you could just wait on another 30 seconds or so, I'm going to close the webinar and the questionnaire will come up. If you could please just give some feedback, that would be great. And finally, yes, we will do a blog of the questions, and we will also send out a copy of the video recording and materials. Other than that, I really do appreciate your time. I'm now going to bring up the questionnaire, and for all of you, have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Chris.
Thank you.